Wellness. We're talking diabetes and what it is for the month. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hello everyone, thanks for watching. We're talking diabetes for this month, right? Myself, Duane Rigsby, Dan Remley. Dan, introduce our guest and we'll get a little history about her first.
Sure.
All right.
I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Joyce Riley from Union County, and she's a family and consumer sciences educator. And she works with me on Dining with Diabetes and the online Dining with Diabetes class that I've talked to you about a few times. And she's one of our educators. So, Joyce, I'll let you talk more about yourself.
Okay. I'm a registered dietitian, and prior to working in Extension, I worked many years teaching diabetes education classes in the clinical setting, and I also worked in a research study with the Women's Health Initiative at Ohio State, working with women and their diets. And then I've been at Union County as an educator for about 2 years now.
Okay. And when did you join the university? I'm sorry?
This will be like my third time, but I used to be a SNAP Ed educator also in Licking County, so I've been with the university probably 4 years this time, but then I previously worked with the Women's Health Initiative for a period of 2 years, probably around 10 years ago, after I got my master's degree.
Okay. So October is National Diabetes Awareness Month.
November, right?
November, I guess. I'm still in another day.
Yeah.
So November.
Right.
So how did this start, or has this been going on a long time? Is it?
Well, the National Diabetes Awareness Month has been around since about 1975.
Okay.
It got really popular in the late 90s, partly because there's just so many people with diabetes. In the United States today, there's over 30 million people with diabetes, and even in just the state of Ohio, there's over 1 million, which is about 11% of our population, and that's not even counting prediabetes. So prediabetes is when your blood glucose levels are elevated, but not elevated enough to be categorized as having diabetes. So it's kind of a warning sign. People that do have prediabetes have a higher risk of developing diabetes unless they make lifestyle changes. So today, just to kind of honor the National Diabetes Awareness Month, we'll talk a little bit about diabetes and prediabetes.
Okay. You've got some slides. Let's see what we got.
So just a few topics that I like to discuss. Basically, what diabetes is, how prevalent it is. I talked a little bit about that already. Risk factors for developing prediabetes and diabetes, and the difference between the two, and how we test for it. Because oftentimes people don't know they have diabetes because they have no symptoms. There are symptoms like being thirsty, hungry, tired. Sometimes if you don't have wounds that heal, getting infections frequently, those are all signs of having high blood sugars. Blood sugars is also another word for blood glucose. Glucose is in a lot of the foods we eat, like carbohydrates. So now, do you have any favorite carbohydrate foods that you like to eat?
I like food in general.
In general, okay. Not just carbohydrates.
Obviously, everyone likes bread.
Right.
So where does bread fall into this?
So bread is carbohydrate, and when it's digested, it turns to glucose. So basically, if you have diabetes, your body isn't working efficiently enough, and the blood glucose or blood sugar stays elevated. And the reason why that's so important is because when you have high blood sugars, it can increase your risk for heart disease, dementia, cancer, kidney disease, and blindness. So diabetes is a pretty serious problem and needs to be paid attention to.
So do you see that there's one particular food that, like bread, is a problem?
No, I don't think it's one particular food. I mean, there's nutritional value to all foods. It's just everything in moderation. But people with diabetes tend to need to be a little bit more consistent with their meal patterns. They need to have their carbohydrates like breads, cereals, rice, noodles, milk, fruits, kind of at the same time every day and a similar amount.
Okay.
That keeps their blood glucose level more consistent, and you don't have the highs and the lows, especially if they're on any kind of medication.
Okay.
So,
Gotcha.
but I'm going to go to the next slide.
Sure.
And this just gives you a little definition of diabetes. Just it's a condition where your blood glucose or blood sugar, people are more familiar with that term, is higher than recommended for good health, and it's found in a lot of the foods, like we talked about, in carbohydrates that we eat, and those are a lot of people's favorite foods. And this, I already mentioned how prevalent it is in the United States, but it also, when you have diabetes, it doubles the medical costs that you have versus a person that doesn't have diabetes.
Really?
So it's a very costly condition to have. So that's why trying to prevent it, reduce your risk, is a major goal. So.
Is there a advantage to try to prevent it because everyone now is obviously about health insurance,
right,
and ways to keep you healthier.
Right.
Even at the university, we here are trying to do a new plans like walking and doing challenges and things like
right.
that. Is there current things even for, well, you put on classes, correct?
Right.
About these, and Dan, you guys
to become
do the same
aware.
thing. Yeah, more aware of this and either how to prevent it maybe?
Okay.
Rather, is that what you're...
They don't like to use the word prevent, but at least reduce your risk.
Reduce.
Reduce your risk. So these are the risks of developing prediabetes or diabetes. They used to call prediabetes borderline diabetes. The new term is prediabetes, similar, but if you're overweight or obese, like your BMI is greater than 25, that increases your risk. If you're inactive and don't get regular physical activity, that increases your risk. If you're over 45 years of age. So the older we get, the higher our risk is for diabetes and prediabetes. If you have low HDL cholesterol, which is the good cholesterol, or high triglycerides. Gestational diabetes, if you're a woman and have gestational diabetes, that also increases your risk. And gestational diabetes occurs and is diagnosed usually between the 24th and 28th week of pregnancy on a person that didn't have diabetes before they got pregnant. So they are at a really high risk of getting type 2 diabetes if they don't change their lifestyle, like maybe increase their physical activity, weight loss if needed, eating healthier foods, those kind of things.
Okay.
So they have like a 50 to 70% increased chance of getting diabetes after they have the baby.
After.
Yeah.
That's interesting to find that out. Okay.
So diagnosing the two, generally speaking, what we do is blood tests. So that's how they diagnose diabetes and prediabetes. And everybody over the age of 45 should be diagnosed for prediabetes and diabetes. And if you're overweight or obese with a BMI greater than 25 and you have another risk factor, you should also be screened for diabetes and prediabetes. Risk factors would include certain ethnicities and races like African American, Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islanders, Asians. They all have a higher risk of developing diabetes. If you have cardiovascular disease or hypertension or gestational diabetes, those are also risks. And if you're overweight and obese, in addition to one of those that I mentioned, then you really need to get screened. So, Does that answer some of your questions?
Well, yeah, that answer. Now, can you help me to understand hypertension a little? With that?
Hypertension?
Yeah.
Okay, so they don't necessarily think that because you have hypertension, you're going to get diabetes. There's just been an association between the two.
Okay.
They've noticed that people that have hypertension often get diabetes, but they haven't really figured that out yet.
Okay.
So that's why that's one of the pieces of information your doctor may put into whether they need to test you for diabetes or not.
Okay.
So,
All right.
but the testing, there's different tests, blood tests, and the first one I'd like to talk about is the fasting blood glucose test, and it's exactly what it says. You have to be fasting for 8 hours, a minimum of. You can have water, but nothing else, and then they test your blood glucose. And oftentimes we may get this when we go in for a physical.
Yeah.
And if it is over if it's 126 or over, that would mean that you may have diabetes. If it's between 100 and 125 milligrams per deciliter, pre-diabetes. So putting you at risk for developing diabetes in the future. Now, just one test won't determine that you have diabetes or pre-diabetes. You need to have another test on a separate day to confirm it, just to be sure. And that's the same for all of the blood tests that test for prediabetes and diabetes. The A1C test, which a lot of people may be familiar with, it's an easier test. You don't have to fast. They can take it any time of day. It gives the doctor or your health professional a better idea of how your blood sugars have been over the last 2 or 3 months. So if you get a result of 6.5%, that indicates you probably have diabetes, or if it's between 5.7 and 6.4%, that also would be pre-diabetes. Once again, we'd want to repeat this test to confirm it. And then the last blood test to test for diabetes and prediabetes is the oral glucose tolerance test, which is just a test where they give you a glucose-containing beverage, tastes very, very sweet, and you're fasting before it, and then at 2 hours after you drink it, they test your blood sugar. So if it is over 200, that indicates diabetes. If it's between 140 and 199 milligrams per deciliter, that would indicate that you may have prediabetes, and once again we'd retest. So those are like the 3 main tests that they use to diagnose. And these are very important because oftentimes people don't have symptoms. And if you have high blood sugars for a long period of time, it really does increase your risk for heart disease, cardiovascular disease. It damages your kidneys, having too much sugar in your blood.
So if you are in those pre-diabetes range, you're wanting to try to get those back out, right?
Back to normal.
Back to those
under 100, yeah.
And how would you find? How would you do that? How would you do that? You know, how would I get education to do that?
Well, you could go to a certified diabetes educator. They're nurses, dietitians that actually could help address whatever might be increasing your risk. Some risks you can't change, like you can't change what race or ethnicity you are. You can't change whether your parent or sibling has diabetes. That also increases your risk for developing it. So, but things you can change are lifestyle things. So becoming more physically active, trying to have physical activity most days of the week, trying to be a good weight, weight management. If you're overweight or obese, try to change the foods that you eat in order to maybe lose a little bit of weight. People that have a higher waist circumference, for men over 40 inches, for women over 35 inches, are at an increased risk for diabetes and prediabetes. And that was technically called the apple shape. So if you see somebody that looks more like an apple, their weight is carried mostly in their waistline, that would be another reason to be, well, I might want to check this out, check with my doctor or healthcare professional.
So how often should you be tested?
Okay, if you're under 45, basically, maybe every 3 years. If you're over 45 and maybe you're pre-diabetic, you might want to do it more like every 1 or 2 years, just to make sure. Because you want to make sure that if you are making lifestyle changes, maybe they are impacting your blood glucose levels or blood sugar levels, and hopefully reducing your risk of developing diabetes. So
That's it. All righty. You got some more slides?
let's see. Oh, this is a really nice risk test. So there's a couple links here. The first link is a risk test for diabetes. So you go to that link and it asks you questions, and that at the end it gives you a result, whether you're at high or low or medium risk for developing diabetes, and the same for pre-diabetes. The second link is you go to that website and answer, it's very short, questions. And then some of the websites give a little ideas about, well, if I am at risk, what can I do, or what should I do next?
Oh, okay.
So
it helps give you some guidelines.
it helps gives guidelines. So they're really kind of fun to do, So I would encourage you to try those.
Okay.
So I think that's all of
that all
my
of it?
slides for right now.
Sure. Okay. So, well, let's go back to some more questions in general. So, you do classes.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about education that you guys offer, you and
Oh,
Dan.
yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Dan, you have an online class you mentioned earlier. Tell us a little bit about that and how that would help a person that maybe has pre-diabetes or diabetes.
Yeah, the course is called Dining with Diabetes Beyond the Kitchen. And so if you Google that, Dining with Diabetes Beyond the Kitchen, you should be able to access the class that way. It should pop up. Okay. And it's designed to help people learn how to manage diabetes. So we offer, it focuses primarily, I'd say, on nutrition, but in diabetes management in general. And there are three lessons. One focuses on carbohydrates, the second focuses on fats and sodium, and then the third is vitamins, fiber, and minerals. Okay. And so each lesson you can work at your own pace, and there are presentations that educators do, so they can watch those on diabetes management. Okay. And then we have shopping tour videos, and we have opportunities to share experiences through forum posts, and we have quizzes too that where people can try to apply their knowledge, and so that's the general format of the class. Okay. And it's also meant to supplement the Dining with Diabetes class that we do around the state. So some counties offer the Dining with Diabetes program, some don't. But the Dining with Diabetes program is a face-to-face program where you learn about healthy cooking skills, and we do diabetes education with a registered dietitian from sometimes Extension or with a healthcare provider like a hospital. Okay. And we do cooking demonstrations, so we show people how to prepare healthy meals.
And it's really important because as a dietitian, the first thing people want is, can you give me a set of menus of what I should eat? So the class, the Dining with Diabetes class, teaches them how to eat. So they don't need us to sit down and just list what you should eat. And it gives them the chance to get variety in their life. So with their foods.
And we offer taste testing as well. So people get to taste some healthier versions of, and we do offer recipes. So, but yeah, it's Joyce saying, helping people apply knowledge and be able to not just have a spoon feed them recipes, but really think about, how is this food going to impact my diabetes and my blood sugar?
And then, we did a spotlight last year about Create Your Plate, and basically it's from the American Diabetes Association, and you can get on their website, and it actually gives you suggestions how to make a healthy plate when you have diabetes or pre-diabetes. So, and it's based on the My Plate, the 5 food groups, and it's a really nice resource. So it's called Create My Plate from the American Diabetes Association, and it's also a spotlight on the online course. So if you go there, you'll find a link, and you can actually try it out.
Oh, so. And Are these classes free to anyone, or do we have to pay for them?
It depends on the county. So I'd say typically on average it's about $30 for 3 classes.
Some counties have funding, like from the senior levy, those kind of things,
Sure.
And some don't. So it does vary from county to county. So.
And there are other classes out there that maybe Extension doesn't offer, but the health department or the YMCA offers a diabetes prevention program in
So
some
those are-
counties, and that's a pretty intense, almost like a year-long type of endeavor. But it really, I mean, if you call your YMCA, you can ask about that.
Yeah.
And there's the
Most local hospitals also have outpatient programming for diabetes
Okay,
because it is so prevalent these days and it's so costly. Like last year, about $245 billion was attributed to people with diabetes and healthcare costs. So it's very expensive. So getting your blood sugars under control, maybe trying to delay or prevent diabetes or prediabetes is so essential.
Okay.
So,
Interesting. So if you, if we develop this and we take these classes, and that's no guarantee that we're going to go backwards and get us non-pre-diabetic, I guess.
Right.
Is it correct? Do you see people? Let's talk averages. What if you kind of know the averages of what the amount of people that are pre-diabetic now?
right, like
maybe out in the world.
in Ohio,
Yeah.
there's 700,000 diagnosed with pre-diabetes, but 1.3 million, they estimate, have it in addition to that in Ohio that have not been tested.
Okay.
So there is a lot of people out there that are kind of on the borderline of they could develop diabetes, but if they make lifestyle changes, eat healthier, get regular exercise, it could prevent or delay getting it. And it's a costly condition, and better not to have it than to have it. So.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that if you do have it, work very closely with your healthcare team and make sure you get those blood sugars down. And I think some people feel almost ashamed that they have to go on insulin.
Oh, yeah.
But the most important thing is to get those blood sugars under control, and then you can taper off. I mean, but I think a lot of doctors are really trying to treat it aggressively up front,
Right.
so that you're not going to have the high blood sugar. People think, oh, I'm a failure. If I don't have to if I take medicines, I'm a failure because I didn't do it.
But no, maybe your body doesn't make insulin or it's not working efficiently, and insulin helps us use the
Right.
glucose for energy in our bodies, which everybody needs. So if our insulin isn't working well, or if we don't have insulin, it's not a failure. It's just, you need to know that and treat it appropriately. So like a goal for before eating a meal, you want to try to have your blood sugars between 70 and 130, and after a meal, less than 180. I don't know if that's something that's easy to do, or do you have any thoughts on that, Dan? Or?
It just depends on the person,
Depends
I
on
think,
the person.
and their activity level and that type of thing. But changing behavior is really hard too, and I think we need to acknowledge that. And
Right.
we just work on little things at a time and try to make sustainable changes. But a lot of people think that I've got to start exercising more and eating healthier, and those are important.
Yeah.
But we're all human and we all have busy lives, and so sometimes don't feel bad if you have to take insulin or get medication to make sure you get those. You need that help, and I think that's something I just
Right,
kind of
that's
want to
very
talk
important.
about.
So, yeah, it's not a failure, right?
Right.
And you're addressing it, and a lot of people, they can't or they don't, and at least you're addressing it, and that's a positive thing, and you need to give yourself credit for that.
I think it's really important too to make sure that you look at those patterns throughout the day and make sure you keep checking your blood sugar and knowing how lifestyle changes can impact your blood sugars. And,
Even like 10 minutes of like a short walk can help lower your blood sugar. So you might eat lunch, go out for a short walk. That would help with your diabetes. It doesn't have to be
Really?
30 minutes.
Right.
Everybody says, I don't have enough time. Well,
any
10
kind of
minutes
activity.
3 times a day. I mean, any time is better than none.
so like
I agree. I
Working with-
think if you can get any time in.
Yeah.
working with your doctor to see where your blood sugars might be higher. So
Right.
if it's after lunch, then you can think about maybe I can take a 10-minute
Yeah,
walk.
I can work a 10, and then you'll notice when you test your blood sugars that, yeah, it did have a good impact. So maybe I'll try to do that as often as I can. And maybe you won't be able to do it every day, but, you know, better to do some than to do none.
Right.
So
Now you kept saying check your sugar.
right.
We talked about taking the blood test and
To
we talked
diagnose it, right.
So how do can we just go get a testing kit ourselves and work it out, or do we need to go to a doctor, or
Well, it's
if
best to
you
go to
don't-
the doctor and get diagnosed,
Get a prescription.
and you get a prescription from them to get a glucose monitor.
There you go.
And generally, they got so many new ones out today, and a lot of them require very little blood. So you check with your healthcare professional to see what is cost effective for you and what would be the best one for you to have, because sometimes the strips are pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of shop around and try to get the best prices, because diabetes can be a very expensive
depending
condition
on
to have.
insurance.
Yeah.
Right.
And depending on your insurance, right?
Yep.
So
But knowing how you work with your doctor to get the right strips, and then knowing when to test, your blood sugar.
you might need to test more frequently at first.
Yes, and know how those patterns
Yeah.
are running.
Right.
Yep.
So the doctor would prescribe you this testing kit.
Right, and then you could
then-
pick it up at like your local pharmacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then a doctor will tell you how many times you should test and when you should test. And as Joyce was saying, it's important, especially in the very beginning, to understand, how food impacts your blood sugar. Like the doctor may want you to test before and after you eat, like lunch,
Right.
so that you can make those lifestyle changes to get
Okay.
those blood sugars, or make adjustments to the medications or insulin.
Right.
That type of
So
yeah,
and it's
different
especially important when you do take insulin, because you don't want to take insulin and not eat something. And the timing of meals might be a little more important when you are on medications for diabetes, and being consistent, like we had said before, with your foods and your meal times.
Right.
So, but
Right. Okay. Well, good. We've got just a couple of minutes left. Is there any other last comments, directions, information that we should point to people, to websites that we can give the listeners, the viewers, to give them more information, more ways of being aware about this?
The American Diabetes Association is an excellent resource. The National Institute of Health has a lot of wonderful materials out there. You can just Google those and you will see all sorts of information on prediabetes and diabetes. Because it's so prevalent, there's just a lot more information and educational materials out there now, which is great, really. It's really great.
Great.
So,
Well, that's awesome. Dan, do you have any? What are we going to talk about next month? Are we going to have? I mean, it's always a surprise to us anyway.
Might be a surprise to me too.
Yeah, but I think this diabetes is a great topic because it is such a big problem to people, and especially I find that in your percentages, do you find that there's certain areas of Ohio that you see more people? Is Southern Ohio, Northern Ohio, Eastern? Is it broken down to that degree?
I don't have the information on what parts of Ohio,
Right.
but I think that there is more people that are actually like lower income
Yep.
and certain actual ethnicities. Like there is a higher prevalence in African American populations in Ohio that have diabetes. So those are like two things that I could think of.
Okay.
So-
Well, maybe next time we can talk about some more numbers and things like that.
Sure,
I always
that
like
sounds
to hear
great.
numbers. So.
Okay.
Alrighty. So we will sign off for now. Duane Rigsby, Dan, and Joyce with us. So we'll talk to everybody later.